What's up, Pastor Jimmy?
Hey, what's up, John?
Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
The great Pastor Jimmy. You used to know me since I was in college.
Yes.
Remember at USC KCM?
Breakdancing, John.
That's right. Still breakdancing. Yeah, still breakdancing. Man, I'm so happy that you're here.
Oh, yeah.
I get to ask you all these questions. Just let me know which chapters to stay away from in your life.
All chapters are open, man. All chapters are open. Yeah.
Talk to me about where you first started. I think you started youth ministry, right?
I did.
At OMC?
No, it was at Valley Korean United Methodist Church.
What, in the valley? Like
in
the
valley.
Sun Valley, like off the 210?
Off of 118.
118, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Were you living up there?
No.
Okay.
I just finished my undergraduate at Cal State Northridge. Did a retreat, a summer retreat. And some of the students found out that I was thinking about seminary. And one of the students whose father was an elder asked if I can be interviewed for a possible youth position. And I freaked out.
And how old are you?
I was about 22, 23.
So you were done with CSUN by this time?
Yeah, I was finishing CSUN. I was in my 6th year as a super senior.
Okay.
And then I was thinking about Talbot. And he got me an interview after the summer. And I just thought, oh my gosh, there's no way I could interview to go into ministry. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, were you already thinking about pastoral ministry, or was it kind of in the back of your mind?
It was a conviction that was growing in my heart. I was ending my undergraduate business program at Cal State Northridge, and I wasn't thinking about internships. I was thinking about how I would love to share God's word, and that passion just continued to grow. It became undeniable at some point, and I had to make a decision, and I just needed some confirmation from God, from God's people, and from the Word of God.
So you took the position?
Yes.
And was it like junior high and high school?
Yes, it was a combined youth group, and the church was called VKUMC.
Oh yeah, I know VKUMC.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So that's where I started.
Wow.
And I served there for about a year and a half as I started Talbot, and I was a youth pastor for about a year and a half.
And then from VKUMC, you went to OMC?
I went to OMC.
And did youth?
I did youth there. Also junior high and high school group. It was for the third worship in the early afternoon.
Okay.
About 150 kids.
Well, that's a big group.
It's a big group.
For a young 20 guy?
Yeah, about
wow.
20 some teachers, about 150 kids. That was pretty crazy.
Dang. Wait, and then where were you living at this time? Were you still in the LA area?
Yeah, so my family lived in K-Town before it even became K-Town. And,
dang. Wait, was it not called K-Town back then?
Well, there was no K-Town.
Oh my gosh.
It was a Korean market. It became K-Town.
Yeah. So like K-Town Plaza, none of that stuff existed yet.
No.
Dang.
Yeah. So 75, when I was about 10, we moved there and in the heart of LA, and lived there till my parents eventually moved out about 10 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Not a lot of people know this, but just share only what you feel safe sharing.
Sure. You
have a career in DJing, right? So is this during your college years?
It was after during my freshman year, my best friend committed suicide.
Oh man.
And because of that, I ended up kind of drifting from God, staying away from the church. I was pretty angry at God. I basically said to God, if you don't care, I don't care. And it seemed like he didn't care. So for about 2.5 years, that's when I started DJing. I did martial arts. I lived and breathed music and martial arts for that period. And then God called me back to walk with him in my junior year because of an OMC college retreat. And that's where my life turned, and been serving him ever since.
And so were you DJing like in clubs or parties?
It was really just like a lot of just friends. It was just more for fun. And then friends asked, and then eventually we did some college like sororities, frats, clubs. Yeah.
In CSUN area?
No, just different areas.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did some like stuff at hotels. We did some stuff at homes. We did some stuff at different venues.
And your name was DJ Scorpio, right? Or Scorpio One.
Scorpio One.
Where did that name come from?
My favorite kick in martial arts was a spinning hook kick, like a scorpion tail. And I'm a Leo, but I didn't like Leo. Leo didn't sound cool.
Yeah,
I like Scorpio.
DJ Leo.
Yeah. So Scorpio won, and people would say, "Are you a Scorpio?" And I said, "No, I'm a Leo." But
And you're like original DJ, like on vinyl, right?
oh yeah,
You weren't doing this digital stuff.
No, all vinyl, 1200s, Technique 1200s, mixer in the middle, and headphone on your head.
Yeah. And I remember like when we were at CMC together, you used to have a Vestax mixer, right? That was your mixer.
Oh, that actually, I forget the name of mixers, but yeah, it was, I forget. Yeah.
Okay.
It had I had probably had like 2 or 3 different mixers.
Do you miss it? Do you miss kind of like beat matching and stuff like that?
No, it's just nostalgia, just fond memories of that period of music. That's about it.
You're like one of those guys when you see today, like DJing with all the digital stuff, you're like, oh, that's not real DJing. Are you like a true hardcore DJ like that?
Yes. Like they're not mixing, the computer's mixing for them.
Right.
For us, for vinyl, we had to match rhythms with our ears. That's it.
Yeah. Man. Okay. So you were at the VKUMC, then to OMC.
Yeah.
And then from there, where did you go?
And then from there, I was asked to come and be an EM pastor at Cerritos Mission Church. And as I started that, it was in tandem with starting as the director of a campus ministry called KCM.
Was there KCM when you were in college at CSUN?
Yes.
And you're part of it?
Yes. So I was actually made aware of KCM's ministry because of Cal State Northridge, and it was called KCF at the time.
KCF, Korean American Campus Fellowship?
Yes.
Okay.
So at the time, there were KCFs, KBSs, and KCM. None of the campuses actually at the time were called KCM. The ones that we started from scratch were called KCM from the beginning, like SC. And I think even Irvine was KCM.
Wait, was it all part of KCM still though?
Yes, because the history of KCM dated back before KCM's existence, where Korean pastors went on to campuses to help Korean students to have Christian fellowship. And then because it was pastor run, they eventually got busy, had to pull out, and it was student run. But the students really needed help and support. So the founder of KCM, Pastor Seok Tae-hoon, came in and decided that it was better not to make campus ministries based upon local churches, but a nonprofit that wasn't local church based, so that it wouldn't necessarily cause students to gravitate toward one local church per se. So just to keep churches intact and bring on staff who would be willing to do that, they ended up offering a speaker or help or support to the current ministries that existed on campus.
When you were in college, you didn't have a college pastor, right? Because I don't think that really existed then in the 80s.
Well, actually, they did start to happen right around that time, but the college pastors were at best 1.5, where they were. So my college pastors at OMC were 2 deacons who went to seminary and became what we fondly call 전도사님s. And they started out at, they're family men. They were married with teenage children, but they became our college pastors, and that's what I remembered. Yeah.
Who was your pastor though when you were in college? Or were you still going to a KM service?
No. So there was a college group at OMC. It just started becoming English speaking at the transition of these 2 전도사님s who spoke both English and Korean fluently, and and so they were the ones that started doing college ministry in English, which allowed people my age and younger to be able to come and hear messages and actually sing songs in English.
Do you still know these guys who were doing your college ministry?
I lost touch with one of them. The other one was one who attended Talbot, and he's the one who encouraged me to come to Talbot to study.
When you were at OMC, was Kang Moksanim there?
No.
Okay, so it's before Kang Moksanim.
Kang Moksanim, yeah.
Okay.
It was before the change of senior pastors. It was still the original founding pastor.
And how old were you when you first started CMC as the EM guy?
I believe I was around 27.
7.
Yeah.
What year was that?
what year was that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Like late 80s or early 90s?
It was like 90, like early mid 90s, like 93 and 94.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, man, we could spend the whole podcast on just the subject, but there's this history of EM
Yeah.
that I'm fascinated with.
Yeah.
This was like kind of the birth of EM, right? Like you were part of that first wave. Like there was no EM before you,
No,
right?
no. Well, at the time, churches didn't even have enough staffing because there weren't enough guys who spoke English to do youth ministry, much less college ministry.
Yeah.
And as that population started to grow, the next phase obviously was English ministries for people who were not just necessarily in college. So that started birthing right around when KCM was starting to transition too, because KCM used to be predominantly Korean speaking.
Right.
And then when I took over as directorship, we couldn't do it in Korean anymore, even if we wanted to. So it transitioned to English. Yeah.
So who were like the guys that were part of that first wave of EM? I assume it's you and Pastor Ben Shin, but who else was there?
Like John Kim, Steve Chang, all of us in our... Yeah. So there was a group of guys who started what we call KACF, and KCM was already in existence around that time. And it was a parallel ministry of second generation pastors, not only doing campus ministries, but college, and then eventually morphed into English ministries.
So were you like, I can't imagine there being a lot of people like today where you can network with a bunch of guys. Was this like your crew? You guys kind of all knew each other?
We kind of pretty much all knew each other.
Yeah.
All the guys our age that were at Talbot or seminary, we kind of either heard of each other or knew each other or pretty knew each other very well.
What was that like going like out of more of a Korean speaking church and worship and stuff like that, and then started EMs and like kind of converting it more to like English worship? What was that like?
It was a blur because I don't think any of us really knew what we were doing. We really didn't have much guidance or mentorship to do ministry. We're just trying to figure it out. We're just trying to serve God, teach God's word as we were taught in seminary. And in terms of structure and ministry, like we're just learning on the fly. Yeah. It was a hard transition in the sense that we weren't sure what kind of support we really were getting from the KM. And I don't think the KM really knew what their vision was either. They just knew that their kids were growing up and they spoke English, and they just needed a worship that spoke English. That was pretty much the idea of an English ministry.
How big was the EM when you first started it at CMC? Like that first year?
Well, it was very small. There was a guy previous to me who had served as a director for a short period of time named James Lee. And then when he left, I came in, and I think it was probably about 10, 15 people.
And was Peter Ma already there?
He was there.
He was there, dang. Because he was also part of KCM.
Correct.
Korean speaking version.
But he was on education staff, and he was more of a staff member at the KM side of Cerritos Mission Church.
Right.
Yeah.
But at that time, was he still doing youth when you came in?
I believe he was doing maybe children's or something like that. Yeah.
What do you when you said Sub Moksanim was the one who came in and kind of said, hey, this should be more of a nonprofit thing. There's this guy who's first generation, but he had like this passion to like this English speaking Korean American side. Let's try to help them. What do you think that came from? Because even that is very odd for me to hear. Like, wow, that's crazy that he thought like, hey, we got to help these guys. Where do you think that came from?
Well, actually, if I can be fair, and with all due respect to Pastor Suck, the vision really revolved around what he called the Korean diaspora.
Right. I remember him saying that. That's right.
And so the vision really was about mobilizing the Korean American church for missions work, and realizing that we want to see them go to the different corners of the earth to share the gospel. There was a particular vision of just what God was doing in Korea, what he was doing with Korean Americans, and just wanting to harness that growth and that passion for the sake of missions. When it started transitioning into English speaking, even that was a little tough, because at the time, even the campuses were doing a lot of the ministry in Korean.
Right.
So they were singing songs in Korean. The preaching was in Korean. Pastor Suck couldn't preach in English.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was in Korean. It was around my time when I was nearing graduation where they actually had to separate one worship that was in Korean and another one that was in English. But the transition happened naturally because that's just the way the population started shifting away from more Korean speaking or 1.5ers to those students who couldn't speak Korean much at all.
Was there any conflict with that? Like with the Korean speaking people, they were like, hey, why are you trying to change it to more English speaking?
No, I don't think it was so much a conflict as it was just awkward because no one really planned for it. We just saw it coming and we just did what we could to transition with it. Yeah. So we went from singing Korean hymns and Korean messages to bilingual songs and messages to eventually just doing everything in English.
Who was your first like crew of KCM staff people? Who were they?
Well, going back to the history of campus ministry, some of the challenges that we faced was just the idea of how far we can take this. And the identity of KCM stayed, Pastor Suck wanted to keep it as a Korean American identity. And so it was a niche, it was a particular area of ministry that he tried to really keep the vision alive in. It was the Korean diaspora, it was the Korean campus missions. I think the challenge came along when staff eventually realized they wanted to go do a church plant instead. And so a large group of them departed right around 93, 94, and we were left with about 10 folks. We had 10 campuses all the way from UC Berkeley to UC San Diego. We had 5 guys and 5 women. And the 5 guys were doing all the campus ministries. And the ladies were our staff members who were helping us plan events and do chapel nights and do everything else in between. So
I remember during those days, you guys do chapel every week, right?
Every Sunday.
Yeah. At night.
At night.
Dude, that's wild.
So
that's
our
wild.
Sundays and weekends and weeks were actually pretty crazy.
Were you flying up to Berkeley too?
I flew up to Berkeley for about 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And drove to Santa Barbara for about 3 years before we transitioned that. And I did the Cal State Northridge as well. So the farthest campus I did as the director.
That is wild. I remember when Richard was telling me that this is when I think he started at Masters, right? And then he went to Talbot.
Maybe. I can't remember.
But I remember him telling me like he would drive to the parking lot, just sleep there before his class.
Yeah.
Because he'd be coming to Santa Barbara or like going to Santa Barbara. My dude, those are wild times.
Yeah.
Before marriage, before kids.
Oh, no. Yeah. Definitely before marriage and kids. Because if we tried to do this while we were married with kids, we would have had a lot of marital problems.
Yeah. Right. Tell me about like when you first started that EM at CMC, what was your plan of action? Like, what was the first thing you're thinking? Like, I got to do this. I got to get this going. What were you thinking about?
Well, I didn't know the people very well because I was a campus ministry guy, and I kind of knew the CMC folks because we did chapel there every week, but I wasn't like familiar with each of them. So part of it was just getting to know the people, just to keep the worship going. And then at that point, we were just looking to try to fill in spots of ministry activities like small groups, fellowship events, and then just try to have a place for the younger generation to come and worship in English. Yeah. It wasn't too far-fetched in terms of the vision and ministry work.
Networking must have been totally different back then. So in your little crew, were you guys sharing ideas and talking with each other? Like, hey, I tried this. Or was it more like, hey, it's survival. Like we're trying to survive.
Well, you can imagine any model or paradigm of ministry was something that was already in place in terms of the local church, the American church. We just borrowed that and just tried to do what we can. As seminarians at the time, I don't think we had the bandwidth to actually try to think and be creative. We were just trying to maintain and try to not let it die. Yeah. So it was really just trying to be faithful preachers. We did ask about like small group material or training. What do you do during the summer? What do you do during breaks? We would ask each other to speak at each other's retreats. Yeah, pretty much. And it was such a small group of guys that knew each other. It was a good tight fellowship.
Dude, we got to get like all you guys in a room and just like share stories.
Oh,
Because I
yeah.
think that beginning of EM, I mean, we're thinking about doing a class on that because I think that's so powerful to know like how everything started. Who were all the name off of the churches? There was like CMC, and then what other churches had EM? I think was Ben at Hanmi at that time?
I think Ben's career at Hanmi was going on parallel at the time. He was there for quite a while.
Where was John at? John Kim?
He was in the Valley at BKCC, I believe.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember. You're asking me to go back like 30 plus years.
These are your friends, though. You're homies.
Yeah, right.
Where was Steve Chang at?
Well, Steve Chang, he started Living Hope way back at
GSE?
at Good Stewards Church.
So when you were at CMC, Living Hope was already there?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't know Steve Chang as well.
Okay.
But I knew I heard of his name and all the campus ministry guys who were doing stuff. So yeah.
And was CCM going on at the same time when you were doing KCM?
Yes.
Oh, so Ben and Steve and John, they were all CCM guys.
So they were kind of, So at the time it used to be called KACF.
KACF. What is that? Korean American Campus Fellowship?
Yes. Yeah. So that's what they did. And that's what they originally started. The name shifted somewhere in between and eventually KCM followed probably a decade later.
Yeah. I remember as a student, we would always be like, oh, KCM and CCM. You know?
Yeah.
Was there any type of rivalry back then? Like these rivaling campus ministries?
I don't think any of us felt like it was a rivalry. I think we recognized that it was different and a different focus. KCM was really heavily missions focused.
Right, missions focused.
And then KACF at the time was really about Bible teaching and training. So they would do a lot of like summer classes where they would teach like Bible hermeneutics, Old and New Testament survey.
Where would they teach it at? Because it's
at
summertime.
Someone's church. I forget.
So church hosted it.
Yeah. One of their churches that they were serving at. They would always have like the summer, it was like a summer seminary kind of thing where students were invited to learn to study God's word better.
During this time, because like we're talking a lot about OC churches, like was like Benson and San Diego already doing EM2 around that same time?
Yeah, I mean, eventually that's where he ended up as he went to Westminster. Eventually, my friend Jim Jung went to Westminster.
Oh, I forgot about Jim. Yeah. Where was he at during this time?
New Life, and that had started with a lot of the former KCM staff.
Yeah.
And then James Hahn, also a Westminster guy. So a lot of Westminster guys. I felt like I was one of the only few Talbot guys.
Talbot, represent. You gotta represent.
Yeah.
But James, he wasn't doing Redeemer at this time, right?
No.
Where was he at?
So Redeemer actually was birthed out of Philadelphia.
Oh, church in LA.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a church in LA, Philadelphia. And it was a Korean church. He was an EM pastor there. And long story short, they ended up launching out and Redeemer was birthed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When you think about the EM days in those 90s, when you started it, what were like some of the problems or even like the needs of the people when you were ministering to at that time? Was it like college and young married couples?
We didn't really have as many married couples at the time.
There were a lot of single adults.
A lot of singles in college. Eventually, people started getting married. Did a lot of weddings at CMC.
Yeah.
The challenge was the expectation from the KM to come to different events and worships that were in Korean. And the EM people didn't understand Korean.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to come to a Korean worship. Mm-hmm. But they wanted us to come very strongly.
Yeah.
So the tension and the difficulty was to try to tell our EM folks that this is something the KM is having and we all need to be there. And the attendance was sparse at best. And the question obviously that was lingering without trying to be disrespectful was, why do we have to be there when we don't understand what they're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember those days.
Yeah. And
CMC.
eventually that's when you started seeing the birth of like songs being sung while lyrics were up on the screen in English. I have to give credit where KMs tried to eventually do even translation via headphones.
I remember those days. Yeah.
So someone was in the back trying to translate the Korean message into English, and the EM people had to wear a headphone if they wanted to understand it.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
Just listening.
Yeah.
I would fool around to see if I could pick up another frequency. I got a radio song here.
Yeah.
What about like the people though? Like, do you think back then when you were ministering to people, where you felt like the need was it Bible literacy? Was it theology? Was it just like practical living?
I think in a sense, maybe all of the above. I think the hardest part also was a lot of us really didn't know how to relate with our parents, how to relate with that generation's lifestyle. We felt like we were raising ourselves. We didn't understand them. They didn't understand us. We coexisted in homes and churches. And I mean, I think a lot of us felt like we're just kind of floating around. There was no real sense of Korean American identity yet. It was developing. And whatever was happening at church, it was really focused around the language, not about a vision. Yeah. So it was really hard. I can't recall if there was any particular thing. We just wanted to have a good worship and good small groups and some good fellowship events. That's about it.
It sounds like you were just trying to get people to meet.
Yes.
Because it was the birth of something new.
Yeah.
So let's just get people here and just see how it grows and develops.
Yeah.
Who was your first hire at the CMCEM? Who's the first guy you hired?
Well, I don't know if we were intentional of hiring. We're just trying to offer space where if guys started entering the seminary, what could we offer internship? One of the guys that came in temporarily was someone named Young Park.
Yeah. He's at CCSE now, right? With Harold.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he, after he finished school, he was thinking about going into ministry. So he did some of the youth and was helping out with like worship and stuff like that.
What wasn't Wani on staff too?
Wani came in for a short period of time. Yeah, for worship.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Wani was my campus pastor when I was a freshman at KCM. That's how I know Young too, because Young was a part of KCM staff during that time.
Okay.
Let's talk about KCM here a little bit, because when you came into CMC, was that part of the deal that you're also going to take over as a director?
Yeah. So Pastor Suck's idea was that the director would serve at CMC. And part of it is just because CMC was a campus church. And so the directors were always there, connected with them and working together. So he wanted me to come there. Obviously, KCM was not necessarily a paid position. The director got a small stipend, but the way to keep it going was to have them come on staff to be an EM pastor. Yeah.
At that time, where were you pulling from in terms of colleges for CMC? Where were they all coming from at that time?
Probably closest were like UCLA, USC, Irvine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing pictures of chapel back in the day, like when it was like Peter Mon then. It was a big crowd. It looked like a big crowd to me.
Well, at the time, EMs and college ministries were not that big. A lot of the people were spread out through smaller churches. If there were some bigger churches like OMC or other various churches, the English ministries or college groups were only big in due proportion to the Korean congregation. Chapels became the most important place for a lot of people who didn't have a college or an EM yet.
Yeah.
And so if they were serving or attending a church with their family that didn't have an English worship for them, a chapel at the end of the day after serving on education somewhere because they spoke English, this was where they heard the word of God and were able to worship.
Yeah.
So sometimes chapel got as big as 200-300 people.
Yeah. Like I remember seeing those pictures. So did you see a drop off from that when you took over, or did it maintain and grow from there?
So it eventually dropped off because college and EMs started developing.
Yeah. Okay.
And so once they were able to have a significant experience and presence of a worship with their local church, then chapel needs started to shift. And that's when we started eventually contemplating twice a month or even once a month, because the attendance at chapel eventually dwindled due to the fact that the need was being met elsewhere.
When did you start noticing that shift after you took over to like growth and like more, okay, I feel like we're now like more English speaking now. Like you kind of noticed that shift.
Probably late 90s, early 2000s.
Who was on staff then?
That's when a younger staff, like Richard Kim, came on staff around 2000. That's when I had to step down and make a decision whether to be full-time campus or full-time local church EM.
Oh, so that was why you stepped down from director?
Yeah.
Because you wanted to get full-time to CMC.
Because the EM was growing. It was about 150. There's no way I could do that part-time.
Right.
And so it required a lot more attention.
Yeah.
And a full-time like place for me to be there, give my focus. And KCM at the time also was growing and able to maintain a stable growth during that time of transition where we were so undermanned. So eventually I had to make a decision. The church asked me to make a decision as well. Either way would have been fine, but I felt like there were plenty of younger guys coming up. So I needed to take on that.
Were you married by that time?
I didn't get married until 2002.
Okay, but you guys were dating together.
Right 2000? Around 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're still single, but you felt like, hey, CMC is growing.
Yes.
I got to start focusing on this.
Yes.
And was Wani with you at that time?
I can't remember, maybe.
Okay. So, because I remember, because that's when I was in college. So I remember CMC was one of the main EMs.
Sure.
Like you either went to CMC, OMC, or Bench's Church at LA Hanmi. Of course, Young Nok was huge, right?
Sure.
But even during that time, there was like major players during that time.
Sure.
I remember CMC was like one of the major players.
Right. But at that time, you're a major player if you have an English speaking guy who was half decent.
so okay, you're saying that even in 2000, EMs still weren't as like available as it is today. They were still kind of growing and developing.
Yeah, it was still growing. Like it took us quite a while for us to have enough seminary grads and guys who are trained, and then eventually, but they were popping up in every church.
Okay.
Because every KM wanted to have an English ministry.
Right.
So if you were hot-blooded and spoke English, you were wanted.
What was Steve Choi at Sarang during this time?
No, he was at Kanan Presbyterian Church and then eventually went to Sarang.
Okay. And then planted at Crossway.
Yes, correct.
Kanan and Bellflower, right?
Yes, correct.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Man, there's so much good history here. Man, that's wild. Okay, so you stepped down and then Richard took over.
Yes.
Where did you go for mission trips? Because in KCM, people don't know like the whole point, like Samok's vision was mission. So we did these mission trips every summer. I used to be on KCM staff. Mm-hmm. Where did you go? Which countries did you go to?
Wow. So my first couple of trips were in Southeast Asia. We visited Philippines, Thailand.
That's when it was together, right? I remember the Southeast Asian was
a
2
Southeast
weeks
Asia trip. Yeah. So, but actually it included, there was a short period in Japan, a short period. Awesome. And then at the time we weren't allowed to do anything in China, but we would take a trip since we were in Asia to go into China, just kind of almost like as tourists.
Yeah, right.
But also to kind of see the culture, the people.
Yeah.
And at the time, of course, there was still underground churches and missionaries going in. So, yeah.
Southeast Asia, you went to India. I know you've been to India.
I went to India for the first time in 95. It was an experience to remember. Yeah. I also went to Brazil in 98. Did Mexico several times with KCM and with the local church. Let's see. I went to Africa. I went to
Uganda.
I went to Kenya first for 2 years.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There was a Kenya trip. That's right.
Yeah.
John Ho went to Kenya. I remember.
Correct.
That's part of his testimony.
And I also did, after KCM, I also did visit Vladivostok in Russia and Cambodia, as well as, I think even in Brazil, we visited Argentina for about a week.
What was your last KCM mission trip? What year was that? Was it to India? Was that your last one?
No, it was to Uganda.
Oh, it was?
It was 2002, I think, in Uganda or something like that, yeah.
You led the 2002 team?
Yeah, Ronnie was on that team.
I know, I remember that.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't remember that. Whoa, because that's when I was a student.
Yes.
Because that's the year that I went to China and Philippines.
Okay.
So, whoa. Okay, so you went to Uganda. That was your last trip. Do you miss it? Do you want to go back again?
To Uganda?
Dude, like any mission trip.
I love mission trips.
Oh, you would? You would go back?
Yeah, I'm still thinking if I can go with our current church right now.
Yeah.
believe it or not, missions, as exhausting as the traveling might be,
I know, so tiring,
is rejuvenating spiritually, because it reminds me of what God is doing, not just here, but globally. And to see that afresh in the missions work, and to do that kind of almost on a daily basis for whatever period of time you're out there, it's tremendously rejuvenating. And it continues to give focus of what we're trying to do here.
Do you keep in touch with Reverend Chung at all, Missionary Chung at all from India?
I only met him during that time once, and then we would see him here periodically when he would come back for a sabbatical or something. But not too much after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been to India 3 times. That's how I know him. So I love that country.
Yes.
Let's talk about this story, because I told you this to you a long time ago. There's a pastor in India who was a former hitman.
Yes.
I think he goes by M. Like his name is M. I remember the last time I was in India was in 2009. And I remember we went to his church and we did like a mini revival for him. And he pulled me aside. He's like, "Do you know Jimmy Han?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I know him." He's like, "I need his phone number." And I was like, "Oh, why do you need his number?" He's like, "I need to talk to him." And I was like, "Oh man, I don't know how I could give you Pastor Jimmy's number." So I was like, "Yeah, you gotta talk to," and I said, "Reverend Chung, you gotta tell." He's like, "No, I've asked him so many times. He will not tell it to me." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can give you his phone number." So what's the story with this? I shared this with you once, and like, you know who I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you first meet him? And like, what is the relationship that you have with him?
In 1995, my first trip to India, it was a culture shock. It was a physical, spiritual shock. It was, for lack of a better phrase, it was a traumatic experience. The food, the language, the culture, the travel, it was just a difficult time.
It's tough.
But however, the fond memories of that year, of that trip was, do you know his name, M?
I just know my aunt, Pastor
Really?
M. That's it. Yeah.
His name is Michael.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah. So his name is Michael. He was a hitman. He came to Christ when he was almost beaten to death by a village of people, where he was going to collect funds for people who had gambled and lost.
Unbelievable.
So he was a hitman to go collect. He was a collection guy. The village beat him up, left him on the street, and a missionary invited him to, cleaned him up and invited him to come to a worship. He stumbled in, sat in the back, and his story is that the pastor said, "There's someone here who needs Jesus." And he pretty much called him out, and he came to faith that way.
Wow.
And this guy's not, stereotypically, I don't know what comes to mind when you think of folks from India. This guy was big. He was thick.
That's right. He's a kind of a big dog.
Oh yeah.
I remember that.
He was very muscular.
Yeah.
And that's why he could do what he did. But his heart and passion became for Jesus Christ. He had a very small local church. He had a loving wife who was a Christian. He had 2 or 3 kids at the time. And he took us, we went and came back from Varanasi, which is a 2-day train ride.
Yeah.
That was a horrible nightmare of an experience.
I remember
Partly
that.
just because people got sick. We had to try to find our way back. And by the time we got back, we were so exhausted. But Missionary Chung, after that, said, "I need you to go to this one area with this pastor that I'm going to send you." And I said, "No." I said no to Missionary Chung.
Because of safety?
I said, because we were tired.
Oh, yeah.
We were sick.
Yeah.
We had just came back from Varanasi on a trip. And I said, "No, we're not going." And he said, "Would you pray about it?" And I said, "No."
Oh man, you said no to Missionary Chung.
Because I was exhausted. I couldn't believe the fact that he had the audacity to ask us to go on another trip the next day.
Yeah.
So I said no. But he said, "Would you pray about it?" And I said, "Okay, I'll pray about it." And after prayer, I realized the Lord really reminded me how much he loved each of our team members more than I ever could. And he said, "Would you trust me?" And I said, "Of course I will." We ended up going on that trip with Pastor Michael.
Wow.
We didn't know, but we ended up going to a group of people of a dialect called Kannada dialect. it was a group of people that had rejected and persecuted, even killed missionaries for over 200 years. But they were launching a building that would become a church plant in that area. A group of people that had never heard about Jesus or the gospel.
That's wild.
Yeah. So we went there. We stayed there for about 4 or 5 days.
Oh my gosh. It wasn't just a one-day trip.
No, we lived.
Dang.
So we were sleeping in this 4-wall building, a concrete building. We didn't know at the time it was going to become a church. They were going to have a big celebration. Missionary Chung didn't tell us. He just told us to go with Pastor Michael and go somewhere.
Typical Missionary Chung. Oh, man.
We went with Pastor Michael, who translated the message. We did our songs and VBS and everything. We gathered kids like the Pied Piper and the village mayor, who happened to be, I believe, Hindu and wasn't interested in Christianity at all, heard that there were students from America who were Christian, and he invited us to dinner to his home, and he wanted to hear the message we had to give.
Wow.
And so we weren't, so this, again, a history of people who had rejected Christianity missionaries for over 200 years, and now they're about to plant a church there. And these were some students from the United States who had come, had no idea where we were going. It was a 2 or 3 hour bus ride to this area. And we stayed there with Pastor Michael, and he would sleep last, wake up early in the morning, make sure we had food to eat, smiled all the time, was the most enthusiastic, energetic men that I've met who loved the Lord. And we took showers on the crops field where they had a well, a pump, and we circled each other, faced outward while one person washed. Yes.
Yeah, to cover.
And people were walking by with buckets on their head, just wondering, where are these Asians near our well?
Yeah.
We lived there for about 6 days, and eventually Missionary Chung came with a group of people and told us that they were going to have this big party, invited all the people to come, and we had a groundbreaking ceremony for a church there.
That is such a wild story. The things that we got away with back in those days.
Yeah. So this was when Pastor Michael had a little moped, and John Kang had to go with him to go get some plants to plant for the church plant outside the building. And so he rode in the back of the moped there while Pastor Michael had a helmet and John didn't. He kept talking to John, so John opened his mouth and he ate several bugs along the way.
Nasty.
He had to hold out both arms, holding the small trees in his arms. And on the moped, and he said his arms were going to break. He thought he was going to fall off because he couldn't even hold on to Pastor Michael.
Yeah.
It's not like the roads are paved.
Yeah.
So we all took our life in our own hands, watched the church get planted, shared the gospel with certain areas of the village that never heard of Jesus, had the privilege to do that. And it was a memory, a time when we walked back from the mayor's house. It was raining. He gave us a long blue tarp to cover us to walk back because we didn't have umbrellas. We got back and our shoes were just, because when it rains, there's no like areas to really walk. So you're just sludging through the mud.
Yeah.
And the mud is mixed with cow dung and every other animal dung that lives out there. And by the time we got back, our shoes and socks were just horrid.
Yeah, nasty.
Yeah, so we brought out a basin of water and we did foot washing, reminding one another of how Christ served us and we are to serve others. And a lot of tears, a wonderful memory that we wouldn't have had we not gone. Yeah. And so that was one of those lessons where you learn that sometimes it may not make sense to you, but following God and his work, man, he starts to show you things you would have never known had you not followed.
It's like one of the best stories I ever heard. Where are all these people, these students? They should be like doing crazy stuff right now for the kingdom. That's like one of the best stories I ever heard.
You know, they're all out there somewhere serving the Lord. I've run into a few of them here and there, still walking with the Lord. Obviously, one of the challenges postgraduate is just staying consistent in a local church. Even if you have a burning, passionate experience for missions during college, to maintain that and to keep growing that is not easy. Yeah.
So that was the last time you went to India, then 95?
No.
Oh.
I returned with my previous church, Good News Chapel, in 2012 and then 2014.
Oh,
But
and
this
you went
time,
to Missionary Chung's?
No. So his missionary James.
Oh, right.
So it was a disciple of missionary Chung who started a similar type of St. Paul school in Northeast India.
Yeah, in Japaguri, right?
Yes. And so we went there twice.
So hot there. Oh my goodness.
So when I went back in 2012, I thought, okay, the train ride, the whole bathroom experience, the sleeping, it would be different. Because one of my associate pastors, Jay, who had gone, he said, it's air-conditioned trains, it's nice, they stayed in hotels.
Yeah.
I went there and we went to St. Paul School, stayed there, and it was hot.
Yeah.
It was the same situation as back in 1995.
Because that was when, 2012 was when like they were still just building. It was, I think there was only one classroom at that time. They were like in the beginning stages of building St. Paul School.
Of course, that's when God granted me the grace to return back to India, to remember the trauma of 95 and to relive it in 2012.
Oh man. Was Jay with you on that trip?
No.
Okay.
No, so one pastor would go to a mission trip at a time, and only one pastor would just remain with the local church to do the Sunday worship and ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. So you did go back. That's awesome.
Yeah. We went back twice and felt very redeemed in my vision and love for India.
Yeah.
It was different because I was older and I was actually able to experience it differently.
Dude, I love India.
Yeah.
It was so not just fun, but the people, the ministry, missionary James.
Hey, that whole area of northern India near Bhutan, and that whole area of what we call tea gardens, what they call tea gardens.
That's right.
It's probably one of the most poorest community of people that labor as almost like slave labor on the tea fields. And the small local churches and the pastors who serve there, God bless them. That is probably one of the hardest ministry I've ever seen. It is to a hurting, broken people, children who don't even go to school sometimes. And we got a chance to minister there. And many times that I spoke at different local churches as the missionary took us around, my heart just broke with a lot of tears. Because the Lord loves them and he's there with them. And to get a chance to go and share the gospel in some of those churches in that community is pretty eye-opening. Yeah, every time you get a chance to see extreme circumstances where God and his word and missionaries and pastors are there, just reminds you of what it's really about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think because of what we just experienced these past 2 years that it's going to be a while to kind of get mission trips going again? Like people feeling safe, getting on a plane, going to third world countries?
Yeah, I think we're getting closer to maybe returning to that. I think one of the most important ways that Western culture, especially American Christians, can get a glimpse of a bigger picture is through missions. To stay here in America it's kind of hard to get a global picture of what God's doing, or to even understand the various ways that ministry is done in a local church. When you don't have all the equipment and you're sitting on a dirt floor and a tin roof with a drum and maybe a guitar, and yet it is probably one of the most beautiful worship you've ever had, it's an experience. And it reminds you what really matters.
Why do you think is the answer just simple? Like, why do you think when students go on all these trips and they come back, they have those beautiful experiences? Why do you think that passion doesn't stay with them? Is a simple answer just because they come back and there's just too much going around them and it's too many distractions?
It's not our lifestyle. Our lifestyle eventually kicks back in and we forget, we get numb, we get caught back into the rat race of whatever we used to live like here. The hardest part is trying to create a lifestyle that includes the idea of missions, the experience of it in a summer, and eventually to talk with other people who also have that same passion. It's really, at the end of the day, it's really about what is included in your daily life so that it's not in the back of your head or forgotten. It's in the forefront of your head and a part of your prayer life, your thought life, praying for missionaries on a regular basis, keeping them in your thought and heart on a regular basis, and remembering what you experienced. That's not easy to do in our culture.
Does CCSE, do Do you guys have like a specific missionary that you have a relationship with that you guys keep on going back to every year?
So we have missionaries that we support. We have a family that we sent out to Taiwan. And what I did as a small group pastor is I asked each of our small groups to have what we call adopt a missionary. And I felt like praying, supporting, and loving on a missionary would be best done through small groups. And so our missions committee sends out an info sheet of who the missionary is. And then we're asked to pray for them regularly in that small group. So each small group has an assigned missionary. And that's how we do that. And then whenever they come and visit on furlough, they would share updates or testimonies about what's going on, prayer requests. Yeah, but the functional way that our church tries to pray for and support missionaries besides just financial support is through our small group ministries.
You have like this long spectrum of experience that I think is so valuable and golden that we can learn so much from. You have so much wisdom. How did you approach your relationship with Samoksanim, who was a first-gen KM guy? And I said this to you before, but Jamie, I think you're like one of the few people that I know that can work with like first-gen so well. Like you did it so well with him. You had a good relationship with him and he loved you. Like, what was your mindset in like approaching this relationship between a Korean culture and then more of a Korean American culture?
I think at first, I didn't really know how to approach Pastor Suck or even first generation pastors. I just thought they were so different because it seemed to me in perception that they were these esteemed, respected authority figures. And because of that, as a younger guy, as a guy who wasn't ordained, and I wanted to approach them with respect, but I didn't understand what they were saying half the time, or more than half the time. My approach to him was, I believed that every pastor starts out his ministry by love because he loved Jesus. And so I have to begin with that. I have to give them some amount of credit to be able to build that relationship. And then from there, whatever reputation they have created or not created fairly or unjustly, I know that happens. I know people misunderstand and may talk about leaders and so forth in a positive or negative way, mostly negative. And sometimes if it's positive, you hear it very infrequently. And Pastor Sak was in one sense, the stereotypical Korean man who sat down and people brought him meals and talked with him and so forth. But I got to know him a little bit when he would invite me to his office, and he started sharing things with me that was much more detailed about what he sees and what he envisioned and what he goes through. So behind closed doors, he invited me in. There was no way I was going to be able to invite myself.
Yeah.
So he invited me in closer, and I think he invited me because I don't think he really thought I was going to last very long as a director. But I think because I withstood the test of time, and I'm a deeply loyal person. I don't like to leave unless I feel like God is leading. So I stuck it through. There's too many temptations to leave a ministry, whether it's for yourself or with frustration or the other person. And I knew that temptation is always going to be there. So I didn't want to move. So I stayed. And I think because I stayed, and we were able to resuscitate KCM through a period where everyone thought maybe it would die after losing so many staff. But we not only kept it going, but I think we were regaining momentum. Because of that, I think he invited me into a closer place where I got to understand him. And working with Korean churches and Korean pastors, it's really because I knew we had no choice. I'm not so great a person. I just knew that we either work with him or we don't. And if we don't, what are we going to do? So we had to work with him. There was no choice. Whether we made that pleasurable or pain, that was on us. So we had to figure out ways to be as understanding, try to have conversations, be respectful, understanding the culture. And the one thing that shifted for me was when I took on the mindset that this is not a half step of a culture cross, it's a full step. When I saw it as a full cultural difference between second and first generation churches. Working alongside them, if I would go out to Kenya and try to work with a Kenyan pastor, why would I not come back and try to work with a Korean pastor? Because that's the same heart. And that's the way I approached working with KM pastors.
I've said this to you before, and I said, I think the reason why you work so well with Pastor Stuck is because you're like one of those humble guys that I know. And I know you said that Jen will probably disagree with that, but that's what I think. I think you have massive humility. And like when you told me that story that Pastor Stuck invited you into his office, again, just hearing that, especially back in those times, that's kind of unheard of, right? And you said he was vulnerable with you.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very different because, again, the typical KM first gen guy, you have to have this strength. Yeah, you need to be a strong leader.
Absolutely.
So you don't want to show weakness.
Absolutely.
What were you don't have to share details, but what were some of the things that he would share with you?
Well, just the difficulty of being a leader, the difficulty of trying to get and keep a vision focused. A lot of us wanted to change the K in KCM.
Right.
And some of our friends and staff left because we saw that as a ceiling. And it was a reality. But I think what a lot of people didn't have the privilege to see or hear was the fact that what I saw on the other side of the door, so to speak, was the fact that this man felt compelled to maintain a vision that I think he felt that he needed to be loyal to. And it wasn't just a personal preference. It wasn't just him being stubborn. I think that was all probably present in some form or another. How could it not be? We all have those tendencies. But he was trying really hard to maintain and keep a vision that it was hard that a lot of younger people keep wanting to morph and transition out of. How do you maintain the Korean diaspora vision of mobilizing the Korean American church as missionaries if it becomes multi-ethnic or multi-Asian? Yeah. So it loses its focus in that sense. And that's why he was so dogmatic about keeping it as KCM, and because then it would lose its niche and its identity. But his conversations in those times behind closed doors were just his struggles, his difficulty, the things that people misunderstand about him. If you get to know him, he was really a very tenderhearted guy. He had a lot of love for his children, his grandchildren. He loved the staff. That's why he would take us to restaurants and trips, and he loved hanging out with young people. It's just that he seemed like a godfather figure and seemed distant. But that's just the way a lot of the culture was, and that he grew up in, that almost you kind of have to be. You can't show weakness.
See, I believe what you're saying, but that's also why I feel like kind of jealous, because you had the opportunity to have like that relationship with him, because he didn't have that with too many people, but I did see that with a few.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be humble in response to what you said. I really felt like to be in my position, and if I'm going to do this well, I had to create space for he and I to have a relationship. If we didn't have a relationship, then there's no way I would be able to do my job to the best of my ability. So it was kind of a necessity. In the meantime, if he said something I didn't like, what am I going to do? Yell back?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a forced humility. It was a choice that really wasn't much of a choice. You had to do it. And so
what you just said right there, like there had to be a relationship or it's not going to work. Was that kind of your main reasoning for sticking it out, or that it didn't go your way? Was that the reason why it helped you to continue and persevere? Because you just knew like it's going to break the relationship and it's just going to cause more of a mess.
In every ministry, it's a combination of both the vision you have and the relationships it'll take to keep that vision alive. So when I started campus ministry, it was because there was an awareness. Campus Crusade for Christ at the time, when it was called CCC, mailed out a large mailer to people who were in campus ministry. I don't know how they got my name or address, but it was a survey of, did you feel persecuted, and do students feel persecuted in campuses in the university for being Christian? And I filled out this survey, and as I was filling it out, I realized, yeah, I do think we do feel persecuted. We do feel a sense of pressure to be more silent, or maybe a little bit more flexible with our words or approach to accommodate a viewpoint that may not agree with us. So from that experience of feeling a sense of pressure, what we call maybe subtle persecution, to be either quiet or to be just compatible to the larger voice, I thought, dude, we need to do what we can to keep the voice and the impact of the gospel on these universities. So that's why I wanted to do campus ministry. I couldn't do that if I didn't have a relationship with the man who started it and held most of the keys, so to speak.
What were some of like your horror stories with like KM? Like, what were some of the hard things that happened during your times at CMC there?
Maybe it's just the grace of God. The people were so gracious and so loving. I think the hardest thing was just, I didn't speak Korean.
Okay, but you said that, but your Korean is good. Like, I've heard you preach in Korean before. Is it because it's like 10 years later, like from 2000? Because at KCM, when you were the director, I remember you would come up and do like a bilingual sermon and stuff like that.
I don't know if you're dreaming something, but part of my conversational Korean grew because I approached working with the KM and the KM pastors as like a missionary. And as a missionary, if you go to a foreign country, you have to learn the language, the culture, and you have to make striving efforts to build relationships with them. Otherwise, you can't build your ministry. That's why I approached the KM. And so when they would ask things, I would work extra hard trying to work alongside them, to have conversations, to go to lunch with them. And simply by doing that, and obviously once a month, I would do a morning prayer sermon and have to try to read phonetically the Korean hymn and try to lead that. That coupled for about a decade eventually grew my Korean because I was practicing it.
Yeah.
And my wife, who's bilingual, would help me with sermon prep and help me put in words that I didn't know how to put in. And eventually hanging with them, talking with them, having lunch with them, trying to do worship, trying to speak and not like be all nervous and fumble. I did that all the way through. But the Korean congregation knows how hard it is if it was reversed. So they were super gracious. And so I spoke. I remember there were a couple of times when Pastor Suck was in Korea. I was the only other ordained pastor at CMC. And he told me I had to speak at the Korean service.
Oh, man.
And I said, are you serious? Like, people will leave your church if I have to speak there. And it was probably one of the most horrific but blessed experiences. I'm prepping for that. When I went up there, you look down and you see like the letters all jumbled. You can't make heads or tails of what your notes are saying. And I had to phonetically try to write Korean words in English.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't write or read Korean. So the congregation was on their toes trying to listen and trying to pay attention. And if I forgot a word, the ladies in the front would try to speak it out to me so that
during the sermon,
they're yelling out words,
correcting you.
Yeah, and trying to help me actually, trying to help me because I couldn't remember what word to say. And at the end, I just thought, Lord, I'm so sorry. I apologize to the congregation, but I think they thought that was such a endearing effort, and so they embrace you even more for even just trying. I don't know if they'll remember what I said. They just loved the fact that I tried. And that's what built our relationship together.
I remember when I was a pastor at CMC, the hardest thing was, them like trying to get EM to do more into the KM style of service. Like, it combined, and then we're all like, it's all in Korean, so it was so frustrating.
It was.
When that happened with you guys, how did you minister to the EM to try to help them understand? Like, what did you say to them? Or did you just say like, oh, you don't have to go, it's okay?
I said, they would like to do this. Let's try to honor them the best we can, and let's try to attend. Obviously, some people didn't want to. Those who had parents in the KM, obviously they felt more compelled to be there and they were present. But there were a lot of KCM students who started coming out to the English ministry there. And, some of them would come out because they're just nice and they didn't mind. And others just didn't want to come out and they didn't. But it was hard. And I had to tell Pastor Sak and the leadership, like, I don't think a lot of our people will come out because it's a different time of worship. And at times they wanted us to cancel our worship and just join them. And I said, it's not good. We can't cancel our Sunday worship for this. It's not like if you cancel it, like 80% of our people just won't show up.
How did he respond to that when you said that?
Obviously, I think he understood, but he was trying so hard to try to build that connection and relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And it was being forced. And that was hard. But I had to push back and say, we can't cancel.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll try to invite people, but we can't cancel the worship.
There's a lot of KM and EM dynamics. We both know that there's struggles and challenges because they are kind of two cultures pretty much, It's like the difference of Koreans born and raised in Korea coming here, Korean being their dominant language versus Koreans born in America, raised in more of American values and things like that, not knowing Korean as much. What do you think, though, that the EM, the Korean American side, English speaking side, can learn from the first gen KMs? What do you think they can learn from them?
A lot of us growing up thought morning prayer was the craziest thing in the world. I mean, who wakes up at 4:35 a.m. to pray every single day?
Before you go to work.
Yeah.
Before you go to work right after that. Yeah.
Or open their business after that, or even go back home and take care of all the stuff they need to take care of. And so our generation, we can't imagine trying to even attempt to have something like that. And plus, their whole pace of ministry seemed ludicrous from 5 a.m. till like 11 p.m., including all their ministry office hours and visitations. So I remember just even personally thinking, that's crazy. I don't understand why you do this. Do you have to be at church at 5 a.m. to pray? I don't think so. We could be at home. And many years removed from that, I realized, there's something very beautiful about what the Korean church does in terms of their prayer ministry. I think prayer is not just things that we say to God, but it's our communal plea before God. There's something of an encouragement and blessing to hear each other cry out to the Lord in prayer in morning and to be present together. I wish our second generation had much more of a prayer culture. I don't know if we even know what that means or what that would look like, and when we would even do that.
So maybe just before meals and that's it.
Yeah. And even if we have prayer meetings, how well is it attended? Because our philosophy is, well, I could do it at home. And maybe the hard sell is, but it's so beautiful when we do it together. And and our busy lives, is that something that we find necessary, or is it something that we find as a would like? And I think it fits more in the area of a would like. Necessary is my personal prayers, but being a little skeptical, I don't even know if that happens all the time very well. So prayer definitely. I think they're also, a lot of churches have a very strong commitment to missions, which is really great. And that's partly what I also really loved and wanted to emulate in the English ministry, because they always took mission trips. Like, I don't know any KM that didn't do some type of a mission trip.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. The only bad thing was that they couldn't reach out to their local community because they didn't speak English. But I don't think they spoke Spanish or any other language that they went to do a mission trip. They did it in Korean with the Korean missionaries over there, and translation. So that's where the second generation, I thought, fit that gap. We were supposed to be the translation generation or the transition generation for them to the local church community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw EM as not as an English ministry, but as an extension ministry of the Korean American church into the community that spoke English and understood the American culture.
You shared the story with me once, and I want you to share it again. You said that you and Jen went to a restaurant, saw Pastor Suck, and you said, come over here. And you told me that, tell me what year this was, but you said that he said, I'll give you like the KM and CMC. I want you to take over and be the head pastor. What year was that when that happened?
I don't remember what year it was, but it was well into our church ministry that we started called Good News Chapel.
Okay, so you're already at GNC.
I was at GNC, and because of KCM or various reasons, we would come back and visit Cerritos Mission Church, or even be in the area of Cerritos. And when we did, we ran into Pastor Sak at a Chinese restaurant, and he called us over, and no greetings, just, if you come to CMC, I will retire. And I was like, what do you say, standing up at a Chinese restaurant, And he said that he took us to lunch. He told me that. And I said, Pastor Sark, I can't do a KM. I can't. That would be a great disservice to the Korean church. But I think it's because he trusted me and he knew that I love CMC.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of trust, that's why I'm saying, like, Pastor Jimmy, you are the guy. Like, he trusted you so much to say, like, I'll retire.
Yeah.
I think that is just a wild story. Did he explain anything, like why he wanted you to do it? Or did he just say, like, because I need to retire, I'm getting up there in age?
Well, I think there was a trust factor. He knew that I understood his vision more.
That's true.
Yeah, and he knew that if there was someone who was going to probably help propagate and continue the vision of why CMC even existed at the time, and then also just for the fact that he saw that I was pretty loyal, I wasn't going anywhere, at least, during that period while I was there at CMC. And even my departure wasn't a very easy departure. He didn't want me to leave.
Of course not. Yeah. He loved you.
He prolonged that for extended period of months before he finally let me go.
Yeah. I could totally see that. Because even till this day, like, I remember a long time ago, there was like the anniversary at CMC, and then we were all there, like all the elders are going up to you, greeting you and stuff. Like, you were beloved there. Did you ever consider, even for a second, like, maybe I could just bring GNC into CMC and then hire a KM guy? You're still the lead pastor, but just hire a KM guy. Did you even consider that? Think about that?
Well, no, partly because the EM model at Cerritos Mission Church at the time was under the KM model.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not an independent.
Right.
But
you could have changed that, right?
Well, I felt like it wasn't right for me to push a model that the senior pastor and the elders were not ready for.
Good.
So I thought if I pushed that, and once I submitted my resignation to actually start the kind of EM model I thought would thrive at Good Stewards Church, he said I could come and do it there. And I said, I knew he might change his mind for me, and I didn't want him to, because that would have been for me, not for the vision. And so I wanted him to maintain his vision for what he felt like was a healthy church and what an EM should be. And if in their vision and prayer they wanted to change that, that would have been a different story. But it wasn't at the time. Yeah.
See, Jimmy, Pastor, you're humble, man. Because like most people, they would have taken that and they would have changed it for themselves. The opportunity is here, but for you to think about that and like what you just said, the vision and everything, man, that is just such a wild thing to hear.
Well, I wouldn't want. I knew he would be tempted, and I didn't want him to be tempted. So I had to make a decision, again, just without putting that pressure on him. And I made a decision to leave because I knew the other church had the vision to launch it out as an independent church and to give the second generation the space to grow and to become mature.
I do think, though, this is in our future, like even in our lifetime, where the EM will be the head leading and the KM is like under EM.
Yeah.
I think we're going that way.
Okay.
Because immigration's going down. South Korea is awesome.
I know.
People want to stay there, you know?
I think the challenge is, at least in some of the metropolitan cities, the second generation is not staying in that parallel relationship with the KM as much. They're church planning out and becoming independent churches. I think there still is a space and a need for that transition. And because whenever there's a Korean-speaking immigrant church, how will they minister to their community? And without the next generation to be present with them, or at least that generation to be present with them to work alongside them, that's one of the visions of why that's a necessary relationship. Whether functionally and ministry vision and structurally, if they can make it work philosophically between the KM and EM pastor, that's a different challenge. And it's a trust relationship, as well as a vision relationship.
You're on the advisory committee here at the seminary, and we're trying to kind of build this vision for an English-speaking M.Div track with the goal of bringing the KM and English-speaking pastor, it doesn't have to be the EM pastor, but to the same seminary to build that bridge. And also, even in our M.Div program, to have it embedded with practical application for the ministry context that we're in, whether it's Korean church or other church. And so we're talking about building something a first of its kind, this KM and EM almost seminary.
Yeah.
Because there is a Korean speaking track here already.
Yeah.
And you said something that we're really running with, and I think it's becoming kind of like maybe the number one value of what our program is about, which is training. If you're a student here in the English speaking program, we're going to train you to be a missionary first and a pastor second. You've already talked about that. And that's the reason why you worked so well at Pastor Suck and a CMC. You wanted to get to know the culture. That's why you learned Korean. That's why you stuck it out. What about students who say like, wait, I don't get that. Like I'm training to be a pastor. Like, why would I want to be trained as a missionary? I'm here in America and California. That makes no sense to me. What would you say to them?
I think whenever a pastor is working with people that don't speak his language, that don't come from his culture, and in fact, in a larger city like Los Angeles or Southern California, we're a hodgepodge of cultures and languages and people. And every pastor I know from seminary, at least in American seminaries, even Korean Americans, have a vision and a passion of desiring to be a pastor for a multi-ethnic community. What does that mean? To me, that's a missionary. Like, you got to cross multiple languages, multiple cultures. But a lot of people, when they say multi-ethnic, they mean mono-ethnic and monolinguistic, which is American culture.
Right.
Because the only people who will be there speak English and gel with the American culture, they just happen to be from foreign countries. To truly be multi-ethnic and multilingual, that's not a common reality. The vision of a multi-ethnic church, or to be a pastor who's able to cross cultures and languages, is to be a missionary. And if you really want to make yourself broad enough to be able to relate on that level and to pastor in that level, you can't do that if you just think ministry is in the context of my general culture. You have to try to look at it and understand it from the other cultures of people that are coming into your church. And that sensitivity in and of itself will help you to be a better pastor. But the missionary mindset that works in the immigrant church community, like the Hispanic church, even the generations that exist today, even generational differences needs to be approached in a missionary context, because our kids speak language and words we don't understand. They use words and they'll say stuff, they'll watch stuff. They live in a different culture. It may be English, but sometimes the words they use we don't understand. And this is every generation. So the missionary mindset really is Christ desiring the ultimate language of God's truth to be our heart language, and to be loving enough to be able to cross things that I don't understand and bridge them, and to be able to be flexible enough to be able to say, you have to be like me. No. I want to understand where you are. So the local church sometimes is a central place where we're saying, come to us. But the missionary is the one who says, no, I'm going to go to you. And I want to understand you. And if you'd like to join us together and you become a part of that, that would be great. How do you do that? That's a missionary mindset.
What about people who say still like, but our church is in America, and even though we are different ethnicities, we all are raised with westernized culture. Shouldn't we just do it with the Western culture mindset and values and everything? Doesn't that make most sense? What would you say?
Of course, the language is going to be in English. I can't do ministry in Korean or Spanish or another language. Whatever we think of culture, however we choose to define that, each person's going to have a slightly different twist or nuance to it because of our ethnic backgrounds. And whether we realize it or not, there's a Koreanness I bring into ministry. But And that may be a particular bias or particular perspective I may have about philosophy of ministry and so forth. But when it comes to being able to be open enough to minister to people of different ethnic backgrounds. So if I get someone from Africa, West Africa, coming to my church, I don't want him to say, you have to do everything completely my way. I actually want to appreciate and value the culture, the language, the history of his experience, and remind him that as we do things together, you're welcome, because we're not trying to be American. We're trying to be Christian. And that's to try to unpack what that might mean is going to take a while, because in different cultures, for example, if you go to Korea, you're not trying to be multi-ethnic. If you go to Japan, you're not trying to be a multi-ethnic church. It's a monolinguistic, monocultural church. But the mindset of a missionary means that at the end of the day, if God brings people, or if God takes me somewhere, that my whole approach doesn't have to shift. So if I go to a mission trip and I have to learn a language and want to understand a person, or want to be able to connect with someone who thinks differently and lives differently, that's a missionary mindset. If I come back home and then I get comfortable and I think that this is the way everything should be, it's hard for me to transition and even welcome people who are different. So then the challenge that every pastor and every seminarian is going to face is, when I go out there, who do I expect to be the people that I'm caring for? If there's no limit to your evangelism, then that's a missionary mindset. Because I want to invite anyone who wants to come. How will you relate to anyone? Maybe I might just attract people that are just like me. That's the limit. But that's a limit because I see my culture, my language as predominantly the way it should be. It's a long journey in every ministry. And I think a lot of people may say, I feel comfortable in this. I get it. The English is more comfortable to me than Korean. But if I'm going to ever work in a cross-cultural or cross-linguistic context, it's going to be important that I understand how I should approach that, not as an American pastor, but as a pastor who happens to be open to cultures, open to languages. And I hope that would lend us to be more useful for the kingdom.
So here's my millennial side's going to come out here a little bit. Okay. So everything you just said, it's so good. Like spot on. I agree 100%.
Yeah.
When I think about our Korean culture though, and the hierarchy and the respect and the authority, I feel like most of the Korean American pastors your age and even my age will have a hard time doing that because they're the main guy.
Sure.
They're the head authority.
Sure.
Even till this day, I still see like these guys, it doesn't feel like they're releasing their leadership and authority enough. I think they do it just enough to get by.
Sure.
But there are these young guys that I get sad, like, man, these guys should be developed so much more. So how can we address that? Or does it need to get more attention? Or is my perspective off?
Attention for what? Like
for the younger generation to be developed more as leaders. But even everything you just said, like this idea of like going to them and reaching out to them. Our hierarchy and culture is more about us.
Sure.
Get to it my way.
Sure.
So those are contradictory things.
Sure.
So how do you think that's going to work within Korean American churches and leadership?
Well, I think trying not to. I don't think I set out trying to be a missionary or trying to be whatever. I have to work with people, whoever God sends. I have to work with people wherever I go. And what is the one fundamental model or paradigm I can function from that helps me to do that in any context? That's, to me, what I had to develop through the years of mission trips was to learn how to be me to any culture, no matter where God takes me. And as a disciple, I think Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, whether they're out there or they come to you. And to me, that's a call to not just be disciple makers, but as disciple makers who have a global missions perspective. That just makes you more useful and there's a broader spectrum with which I think you can do ministry. to be able to train the younger men and the hierarchical system that you mentioned, yeah, that's a cultural barrier, a reality that sometimes exists. And the sad thing is, I don't think the people living in the culture would see it as a barrier. They just see it as normal.
Right.
And this is what missions and missionary does, the mindset does, is it takes us out of the paradigm of what seems comfortable and we don't even realize we're in, to be able to see it from a different perspective. I'll give you an example. I went to India in 95. I went back in 2012. It wasn't until my trip in 2014 that I realized I was looking at India as an American. And what I mean by that is, I thought India would be such a nicer place if they just didn't leave cows on the street and let cows poop wherever they wanted to. Because you're not trying to just avoid traffic and people, you're trying to not step in cow dung. So I'm just thinking, why do you do this? Why do you live like this?
Right.
This is so unclean.
Yeah.
And then I realized, but the Indian people don't see it as unclean.
Mm-hmm.
To them, this is normal. As an American, I see it as unclean. And I could not see that my perspective and my frustration with that culture was an American. But if, as a missionary, I have to see normal the way they see normal, and then I could minister. So for pastors who are stuck in a hierarchical system, the missionary mindset will help them to see, I want to understand what you see as a 25-year-old. I want to see the world through your eyes. Help me to understand that. And once I understand that, how can we work together? That's how it's going to happen. But it's not going to happen if I'm standing in my platform and thinking you should be like me, you should come and be like, and do ministry like I do. I can't see my bias. But missions helps me to see my personal biases and helps me to see and embrace differences that I wouldn't know how to embrace were it not for Jesus Christ and being able to experience life differently. What's
really hard is that the pattern from when you guys all started pastoral ministry, because your pastors were all first gen or 1.5ers, so they didn't really develop you in that way.
No.
And because you guys didn't learn that, you were my pastor. And then so we kind of learned the same stuff. And now that we're pastors, it's just the same thing. You know, we never learned it. But with millennials and Gen Z, because of social media, they're able to learn so much more from different things. It's now all coming out. Like, you know, where we're going to try to change this. Mm-hmm. And I hope that that pattern does break so that we can start doing that missionary mindset, releasing authority and developing young guys, things like that.
Yeah. Following Christ and understanding the kingdom mindset and paradigm, I hope will free us from any type of need to be hierarchical or controlling, because Jesus turned that whole paradigm upside down, right? He said, came to serve, not to be served.
Yeah.
And to really be a student and a follower of Christ in that way requires a lot of humility to be able to say, I'm not the man, Jesus is. How do I keep Jesus the man? And how do we stay as his faithful followers and servants? That's not an easy thing to do when the culture keeps saying, you the man,
right?
And you should become the man. And that's not the goal. And so as I get older, I really want to make sure that I don't leave that mindset. I want to remember that I'm always in a learning posture. And I always want to be in a posture where I'm growing and I'm following. And I hope I can help others to follow Jesus, not follow me.
You and I got to share an awesome experience as pastors at GNC and GSC model.
Yes.
Where you were the pastor GNC, I was doing elementary. And we had Timothy Sam Moksanim and then now Som Byungju Moksanim. Mm-hmm. And we got this opportunity once a year to do that family retreat.
Oh, yeah.
Where it was no business, no ministry. We just got to hang out, pray for each other. Yeah. And I still remember this devotion you shared. There was one, I think it was actually like one of the last family retreats we did before you moved to the elementary school off campus. Uh-huh. But we went to this one hotel. It was deathly hot, by the way. I don't know where we were. We were like on the way to Vegas or something like that. Yeah. And I still remember this devotion you shared where you were talking about there's Korean culture here, Korean American culture here, but let's always strive for biblical culture. That should be the most dominating thing. I remember you sharing that. I was like, man, This is awesome.
I don't remember that at all. Your memory's amazing.
No, I remember that. I was like, man, this is so good. Like, this is what we should be striving for. Mm. And Pastor Jimmy, I think you do really model that very well. Oh. I think you model that very well.
Well, thank you for the compliment, but I think it's really just wanting so much to see people on different spectrums come to meet. And the only way we're going to do that is to not be so dominant or expecting, but just be good followers of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let his model and his truths direct our lives. And I think we can meet.
It's great.
Yeah.
Great.